Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode 24, being recorded on Friday the 11th of March, 2016. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today, whenever it is you find yourself watching this. So right off the bat, I should apologize for the fact that I am currently recording in a suboptimal recording environment, and if you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm particularly sensitive when it comes to recording, especially with, changes in, I guess, the ecosystem of my home. It is currently 6 degrees Celsius, which is about 42 degrees Fahrenheit outside, which is very, very warm for this time of year compared to historical averages. And that also means that, unfortunately, it's 28 degrees Celsius, or about 81, 82 degrees Fahrenheit, in my apartment. So, all of that is to say that I need to currently have the window open, in addition to having my humidifier on full blast, because the humidity is rather low as well. So, that means that you may hear, for instance, the daycare on the ground floor of my building. The kids are currently outside playing, and they can be a little bit loud, as kids are wont to do. And the second thing is that I also live somewhat close to an airport, so there may be moments where I need to mute my mic in post-production and just let you take in the ambience of the area, because there is currently a plane flying overhead, and they can be quite loud. But with all that said, I wanted, even, in spite of the suboptimal recording environment, I've been very excited for a very long time to record this particular episode, because we have a lot of really interesting things to talk about. And I guess the first of those things are these statues / petrified masses of corpses. Mats of corpses, I should say. And we'll talk about them a little bit more when we get to the lower part of Yahar'gul. Because they, in addition to several other features of the area, raise some really interesting temporal and I guess chronological questions, or questions of chronology, in terms of what has happened here recently, since around the time we visited, I believe in the 8th episode of this series, Hail the Nightmare. And what is currently happening now, and how much of that stuff was here and we just couldn't see it, and that we are now able to perceive it, because we killed Rom and we revealed the Mensis Nightmare ritual. But even then, the direction of causality is not entirely clear, but we might as well just get into it rather than just stand here and talking about how many interesting things there are going to be to talk about. But yeah, these statues, there's something I noticed about the statues on the lower Yahar'gul that is quite interesting. I noticed that prior to recording. What I tend to do before recording each episode is I fiddle around with restore points. That is to say, if I need to record an introduction, I will create a restore point for my builds, for my save file, and then I will use that restore point as a means of going ahead into the area that I'm about to record for and getting whatever footage I need for the introduction. And so that area there is the shortcut. And I actually came down here so that we can get the item that was on this corpse here, not remembering that we had actually already done that. So you may recall that we wanted to get the Upper Cathedral Ward key in an earlier episode, so we came here and just sort of ran through the first little bit to get to that part. But we didn't open any of the shortcuts or light any of the other lamps, so this will, in effect, be a full exploration of Yahar'gul. And I completely lost my train of thought about what I was talking about previously, so I apologize for that. as we can see when we are in the Upper Cathedral Ward, the detail in this lower area is actually a fair bit lower because it's farther away, and I guess that PS4 is not powerful enough to be able to render those things at a distance, in addition to the immediate area. Yes, restore points, that's what I was talking about. So, what I did in this case was, yeah, I created a restore point, went and filmed all the footage I needed to film, and then restored back to the previous point. And I've also done that in this case just to be safe. If the audio for this recording ends up being unusable, if the episode ends up being of very low quality, then I will have to record it again, which is unfortunate, because the reason I'm recording it today is that I have a fair number of things, very important things I need to do tomorrow, Saturday, and the day after that, Sunday. So I'm recording this now because it's really the only time I'm able to record it in the next 3 or 4 days. And it's an episode I've been excited about recording for quite some time. And part of the reason for that is that I've never actually done a full clear of Yahar'gul. In part because of the false gods, the amygdalae here. And interesting to note that these amygdalae, or these false gods, have tentacle type things coming out of their face. Just like the Nightmare Executioners in the Hunter's Nightmare, and just like the Brain Suckers like we saw in the previous episode. These ones don't make me shudder for some reason quite as much as the Brain Sucker does. But yeah, there are also these Tumerian women, bell-ringing women, which we learned in the previous episode that the bell-ringing woman appears to be a mad Tumerian. So we're going to talk a lot about the Bell Women in this episode, and that means we're going to be talking a fair bit about, we're going to be referencing 2 different videos from Redgrave. The first being what I believe was the first episode in his Little Things in Yharnam, the episode on the caskets. And the second being an episode that he released, I believe, on Christmas on the bells. And so we're going to be bringing the insights contained within those videos, of which there are many, to bear on, yeah, a lot of the discussions that we're going to have here today. So I would highly recommend going to check those videos out if you have not already seen them, because, yeah, they've been essential in allowing me to formulate my own kind of understanding and ideas about what it is that's going on in this area. So among the things that I have never seen as a result of the fact that I usually just run through this area, because of the Tumerian bell-ringing women who just constantly summon enemies, is the fact that that false god actually attempts to reach down and grab us. And yeah, that's not something I've ever seen. So I would imagine that all it does is it just squeezes you, and then, you know, you get a frenzy buildup, and that's that. But I've never done it, so let's see what happens. Hopefully we're able to survive whatever it is that takes place, but if not, no big deal, because yeah, that's not something I've ever seen. And what is happening with the camera here? Interesting. For a second I thought that I was being transported back to the lab. But maybe that was just my hand lantern. So yeah, about what I expected, but that's just, it's not something I've ever seen before, because I usually just run straight through this area. But yeah, we're going to be trying to kill all the bell-ringing women so that the enemies don't constantly respawn. And we'll talk about what's happening there as well in a minute. But yeah, it's not something I've ever done, so that we can, take a nice, long, slow look at this area. So these skeletons and petrified bodies we find all over the place is something that we're also going to talk about. This is a hunter corpse model with a bolt damp blood gem and a message, a note. The Mensis ritual must be stopped, lest we all become beasts. So as with all the other notes in the game, I do think that it's possible to look at the note and try and figure out who it is that left it. And recall that in previous episodes we established that the notes left by the messengers are either from hunters, from previous Paleblood hunters, or from anyone, more generally speaking, more broadly, associated with or in commune with the messengers of the dream. And we have a few comments that were raised in the context of the previous episode, where we were talking about the Tumerians and the statues that we find throughout the Gravestone Chalice. That might also raise some insight into, provide some insight into who or what the messengers actually are. And that was one of the huge mysteries of the game that prior to the comment exchange in the comment section of the previous episode, that I had really no answer to. But we'll talk about that as well. So this we're going to see over and over again, just these petrified bodies, and more as we get closer to where the Mensis ritual was taking place. But I don't understand this message, really. The Mensis ritual must be stopped, lest we all become beasts. How would the Mensis ritual lead us to all become beasts? I don't understand that message. It's one of the... I guess there are many developer messages that have very unclear intentions behind them and an unclear message, so to speak, contained within the note. But that is one that, leaves me more or less dumbfounded. Note that all the enemies have this bloody, like when you see them being summoned, they sort of emerge from a pile of blood. And we are doing just an obscene amount of damage with my pistol, which I've actually upgraded to +10 now, and my saw cleaver. We're doing 566 with the saw cleaver and 333 with the hunter's pistol. So some of these petrified corpses we see praying, some of them we see holding their head in their hands, some we see trying to get away from something. All in various states of, seeming to express the emotion of what the heck is going on here. This is not good. What's interesting is that there is actually an ambient noise here, or an ambient sound. Whereas previously I was thinking that after the... And I suppose all of the areas have sort of an ambient music playing in the background, and ambient sound asset, for lack of a better way of putting it. But the one here just sounds very much like the low points of the song that's playing in the upper cathedral ward. it's an eerie, suspenseful sound. Air. And this is, I believe, yeah, the level 2 version of this rune. And recall that we picked up the level 1 version of this rune from Henrik. The air sees sentimentality in the warmth of blood, and acknowledges visceral attacks as one of the darker hunter techniques. More blood echoes gained from visceral attacks. Perhaps the air is a hunter who bears the echoing will of those before him. Bears the echoing will. So that would seem to be a reference to the literal meaning of blood echoes. That it includes the dying wish of the blood. That when we're receiving these blood echoes, we are also, in a certain sense, receiving incorporating into ourself the dying wish of, to whomever or whatever that blood previously belonged. Okay, so we've actually already been down that way, I believe. Yeah, but okay. We might as well go back and just make sure that, because I can't recall, I know that we grabbed the key, but I might have left the other items the way they were. So let's go double check that. So we gotta be fast, actually, because now I was just thinking that the bell-ringing Temerian woman's actually up there. So those enemies are gonna keep respawning. Tiny Tonitrus. So let's get to a safer spot before we read the item description for that. Tonitrus is a unique weapon crafted by Archibald, the famous eccentric of the Healing Church workshop. This is a similar Morningstar mace that utilizes quicksilver bullets. When struck into the ground, it recreates the blue sparks that are said to surround the Dark Beast. Like Archibald's masterpiece, this too is a superb conductor of the powerful blue sparks. It's very interesting that, wow, and that used a lot of quicksilver bullets. Oh no. So I'm trying to think about the non-Dark Beast enemies who use lightning attacks. And the only one I can think of is the Orphan of Kos. We see these women much like the statues, or much like the petrified bodies we find everywhere. We see these women similarly praying and holding their head in their hands. If you light the lamp, that crystal lizard is liable to get away, so I usually kill it before I light the lamp. You can see down there one of the Yahar'gul hunters, who were seemingly left behind. And we just now caught our first glimpse of the area that we were in previously, the chapel. Hypogean Gaol, I think it's pronounced. There was someone who very kindly left a message on one of the earlier episodes to indicate to me how the pronunciation, how to actually pronounce that word, but I've since forgotten what that is. So I apologize to whomever that was that left that message. So that is, of course, only one of 3 hunters that are there. So we're going into this not most optimal shape, given our blood vial and quicksilver bullet count. So let's see how it goes. Okay, that certainly was not pretty. Earlier on when I was coming here to get the footage for the intro, I destroyed all 3 of them. That was a considerably less graceful effort just now. So Madman's Knowledge. Whole lot of quicksilver bullets. And the third one, I believe that was the one using the Beast Claw, drops the Beast Rune. A secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. A transcription of the roar of a labyrinth beast. The bearer of the Beast Rune has accentuated temporary transformation effects. Beast is one of the early Carol runes, as well as one of the first to be deemed forbidden. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beasts. So before we explore any further, we're going to go open up a shortcut. There's a lot of stuff for us to talk about here, so... going to make sure that we're able to do that undisturbed for the most part. So you may recall, way back when we came here, I talked about this, about the lamp being broken. And I asked whether anyone might be willing to share in the comments section what their thoughts are as to what might have taken place, why this lamp would seem to have been destroyed, whether intentionally or otherwise. And we only actually got one comment on that when I went back and looked at the comments for that episode. And it was from Marty26, who writes, "Thinking about the broken lamp in the Gaol, I always assumed the 3 hunters were responsible in an attempt to keep Paleblood hunters away from their business. Although I always assumed the lamps were not a physical property in Yharnam and only appeared for dreaming hunters. Begs the question, did a dreaming hunter do it, and for what reason? Quite like the idea that Mensis maybe had members who were connected with the dream to keep track of hunters who might disturb their work." This is something that Redgrave also discusses in the video, his Little Things in Yharnam on the bells. That you look at the bell at the top of the lamp and you might think that it's there, that is how we are able to use the lamps to transport ourselves from one place to another, or notably to the Dreamlands, and then transport ourselves to another place. And that, it seems to me, is an important distinction there as well, that while frustrating from a gameplay perspective, the fact that we can't just go to the lamp and warp from, lamp A to lamp B, where lamp A and lamp B are both in the waking world. We need to first go back to the hunter's dream if we're to warp anywhere else. And so, again, while I agree, very annoying from a gameplay perspective, from a lore perspective, it's very interesting. And in this case, this lamp would need to have been destroyed for gameplay reasons as well, so that you have, so that you're able to make that descent from the top, from the entrance of Yahar'gul Unseen Village, all the way to the bottom. That we descend into further cosmic horror. And on the bells and their significance, something Redgrave pointed out in that video is that the bells are still there, although there are only 2 of them now. One of them is on the floor, clipping through the floor there for some reason. And the lamp is shattered and on the floor here. And it looks almost like the lamp post is made of like 2 wrenches stuck together, because that looks very much like a wrench, the lower half, right where the chain is. So I don't know. What Redgrave essentially concluded, if I recall correctly, is just that both parts need to work together. That you need the bells, you need the lantern, or the lamp itself, and you also need the messengers who are congregating around it, because it's interesting that when those things are not there, the messengers don't congregate around it. There are no messengers here. So it could be the messengers that allow us to warp, it could be the lamp, it could be the bell, it could be a combination of the 3. But whatever the case, those things have been disrupted here. And when you try to warp to that lamp in the Hunter's Dream, if in fact you came here before the Blood Moon, then it would basically just say not functioning at this time. Same message you get when you try to warp to the Grand Cathedral when either the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst or Eileen are waiting there for you. Here we see a Scourge Beast, but not a Scourge Beast. A Scourge Beast composed of myriad body parts. But it's still a Scourge Beast. In a sense, this is another quote-unquote reskin. see in its rear left leg, it's got secondary leg just kind of hanging off to the side. Right where its rear would be, there's a foot, or a leg, lower half of a leg just sort of hanging out there. Its face is, I don't know what that is. But it's certainly frightening. They drop twin bloodstone shards, and I believe they can also drop bloodstone chunks. So recall in a much earlier episode, we established with the help of Leo Alvarado, who had this brilliant idea that that Dark Beast Parl was imprisoned here, and he seems to have tunneled his way out there into the graveyard of the Dark Beast. And we find here, as with elsewhere, and I don't recall where, I think it might have been JSF with whom I discussed, or I believe it was JSF. We discussed this in one of the episodes, in the episode in which he was on. The fishing hamlet was about, although once again it was a 5-hour conversation, so I'm not sure whether it made it into the final cut, about whether or not the Thumerians, or whether or not the Snatchers are Thumerians, recruited from the tomb, or maybe it was with Redgrave, I can't recall. But yeah, there's a lot of there's a weird connection between the School of Mensis, or just Yahar'gul as an area, and the Thumerians. But we recall that, and because we do find the Snatchers in the Chalice dungeons, but after the Mensis nightmare, or after the nightmare of Mensis was beckoned, they were disposed of. By whom? I'm not entirely sure. It's possible that, you know, it was like an Order 66 type situation from the Star Wars prequels where, you know, they did what they needed to do, and they no longer had any need for the Snatchers to go out and collect body parts from elsewhere in Yharnam and bring them to Yahar'gul. But it could also be that all of those body parts, which, as we'll see, especially in the case of the cramped caskets, coagulated seemingly together to create these monstrous forms. And that maybe after that took place, those monstrous forms took revenge on the Snatchers responsible for taking them here. So it could be, you know, I can see there being a strong case made for either or both of those. But whatever the case, the Snatchers are now all dead. And if we go to places in the Waking World where we previously found them, we no longer find them there. It's a very intriguing part of the whole Mensis puzzle, I think. We're going to be needing some blood vials very soon. You may recall that this is the cage wherein we found ourselves after having been kidnapped by one of the Snatchers and taken here in their sack. This was a note that we read almost immediately after leaving that cage, which says, "Madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon, uncover their secrets." And also recall that this is the place where we first met Adela. And And the room once again seems more or less unaltered, except for another dead Snatcher. Also has bloodstone chunks. A solid chunk that forms in cold blood. After death, a substance in the blood hardens, and that which does not crystallize is called a bloodstone. A chunk will never appear in the blood of an ordinary human. Seek deadlier foes if bloodstone chunks are needed. So I don't know what that is meant to imply, because, even though the item shiny appears more or less on the head of the Snatcher, what I always took from that was either that was that we were actually taking it out of their sack, but given the fact that they seem to have been just taking normal people in their sacks, snatching normal people, that would seem to suggest that we're getting the bloodstone from the blood of the Snatcher themselves. So I'm not sure about that. There was an eye collector here previously, but she is now gone. And an encounter with our very first cramped casket. So this was one of the first major insights that Redgrave, in one of his, it was his first episode of Little Things in Yharnam, where he pointed out that, we find these caskets all over Yharnam, and the vast majority of them seem to have been in transit en route to Yahar'gul. And that those caskets, as we've seen at several different points in this playthrough, contain the body parts of multiple individuals. And so what I'm picturing happened here, and this may or may not have come because I haven't actually put the intro together yet, but I'm hoping to convey what I thought happened. And that is that, once it got to a certain point where we killed Rom, or, that might just have nothing to do with it, but insofar as it does, if that in some way causes the nightmare to be beckoned, or allows their attempt at beckoning the nightmare to be successful, that there's a flash, whether an instant one or a prolonged one, and on the one hand, and this is something that Redgrave also sort of surmised in his video on the bells, that once the ritual is successful, there's a flash, whether a quick one or a prolonged one. And what happens is that the Mensis scholars that we find in the room after the Advent Plaza lamp, they are transported into the nightmare that they've created. Whereas everyone else, it's almost like a rapture, in a way, is how I've pictured it. Where, like the Christian idea that it's Judgment Day and all that, and all of the good people will kind of ascend into heaven, and everyone else will just, all the sinners will just kind of exist in hell on earth, in a sense. That the Mensis scholars, have gone to the rapture, but everyone else that was left over, all the other, I guess, the denizens of the Unseen Village, I don't know who they would be or why they would be living here, but those people are left, and we'll find the remnants of them later, to deal with some sort of calamity. And that before, this portal closes between the Dreamlands and the waking world, a bunch of mad Temerian bell-ringing women come from that side over to this side. And I love the way that Redgrave articulated this in that video, when he says, that the bell-ringing women arrived here, and they were like, wow, this place is great, look at all these body parts, look at all these things that we can do, and they started, I guess, populating this place with the dead. With people like this dude here. But we'll get into that more in a minute. Like I said, a lot to talk about here. And the next thing is this note here, which says, "Behold, a Paleblood sky." And there's a note that a quote from the Hidetaka Miyazaki interview contained with the interview he did with Future Press for the official guide that we read during that episode, and I'm gonna repeat it once again. I think there are two different ways you could interpret Paleblood here. One is the color of the sky after you defeat the vacuous spider and the Mensis secret ritual is revealed. The sky there is a very pale blue, like a body drained of blood. There's also a message placed in Yahar'gul Unseen Village that calls back to that. This is before the ritual is revealed, so when you're kidnapped and go to Yahar'gul, you don't know what it could mean yet. Then, after the ritual, you could look at it again and it'll dawn on you. So I don't know what... because, yeah, this one... And I guess part of the problem is that the clouds really get in the way. Because when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing the reflection of the moon, the blood moon, off of the clouds, which creates a sort of, orangey red type effect, or it gets in the way of the sky, in a sense. Because when I'm looking at them side by side, the pre-blood moon Yahar'gul sky and the post-blood moon Yahar'gul sky, I think that the pre-blood moon fits this description better than the post-blood moon. That is, that it's a very pale blue. But I've often thought that, I'm thinking just now, I'm realizing this is probably because of the light shining off of the moon. Because if you look behind the clouds, you do see that it is a very pale blue. Something else very interesting to note about the clouds and the moon, as JSF pointed out, I believe it was in a comment in an earlier episode, that the clouds both go in front of and behind the moon, suggesting that it's not in orbit. And yeah, you can very clearly see that here, that some of the clouds are in front of it, some of them are behind it. Because if the moon was actually orbiting the Earth, it would be far above the clouds. And the clouds wouldn't be passing in front of it and behind it. I'm considering whether or not we should replenish our blood vials. So we've got a fair number of enemies to fight here. Yeah, let's do it. His statues really creep me out. We can, of course, just hop off here, but we're not going to do that just yet. Where did that guy go? Did he fall in the elevator shaft? Poor guy. Okay, so we have a couple of paths that we have to check out before we proceed. So we're gonna do that. So the first is down here, although I don't believe there's really anything here. It's interesting that we find these wheels everywhere. Once again suggesting that Yahar'gul was sort of the center in a hub-spoke network of dead bodies and body parts. Yeah, I think we've explored everything in this particular area, so let's move on. So whereas previously there was a giant boar making its way up to us from down these stairs, now it's, yeah, a cramped casket. And you can see once again that it is just a mishmash of body parts. That amidst the calamity that came along with the beckoning of the nightmare, these body parts just sprung out of these caskets. And there are also these bodies sort of on fire here. And when you lead the cramped caskets over to those pyres, something strange happens. So I have no idea what that is, like what the significance of that is at all. But it seems to lower their defenses. I should have actually let him stay on there longer, because if they stay on there for a few seconds, I believe that the pyre goes out. So scratch that in terms of the explanation for the snatchers, because we see that this cramped casket was very clearly standing over the body of a dead snatcher. So it does seem as though scratch what I said previously about them as well, because it doesn't seem to lower their defenses, it seems to render them more or less immobile. It's very, very strange. And we can tell that this is a human as we know them and not a Pthumerian because of the shape of the mouth. It's not circular, it's although Pthumerian women seem to have normal shaped mouths, if Yharnam is any indication. But I could be misremembering that. But yeah, so we find this cramped casket sort of hunched over the body of this snatcher. So, in a strange roundabout way, enacting justice, I guess, against the snatchers for stealing these bodies. It's just looking once again that you can see the shiny is sort of coming out of its neck. And here we find a cart that we find these all over Yharnam. Maybe not this specific one, although I believe we do find this specific one in the River of Blood. I could be wrong about that, but I believe we do. And yeah, you see it's shaking, indicating there's something inside. And so though previously we, prior to this particular set piece, we have no way of proving necessarily that, all of these things are being used to transport bodies. Until... So it does look as though there's beast fur kind of all over the place. It, like, within and around this thing. So maybe the fire thing is as simple as that they're beasts, or, they have very prominent remnants of beasthood within their collective selves, and therefore when they walk over the pyre, they take that damage and are rendered more or less immobile as a result. But yeah, it's very, very strange. We can also actually put it out as well. But the HP drain and its effect on us is... So, yeah, that would seem to make sense, because, again, one of the very special things about a Paleblood Hunter is a certain immunity to the Scourge of the Beast. And so it would make sense that, it would have less of an effect on us than it does on the Cramped Caskets, who, seem to have beast fur all over the place, and therefore, some remnant of the Scourge of the Beast within them. And it's tough to even talk in spatial terms like that when it's just a mass of bodies all kind of stuck together. But yeah, so in this part of the city, we only get small hints as to, what has been happening here, what's been going on. This is the corpse from which we looted the Yahar'gul Hunter set. Thick black pullover worn by hunters of the Unseen Village. The hunters of Yahar'gul answer to the village's founders, the School of Mensis. Hunters in name only, these kidnappers blend into the night wearing this attire. Designed primarily to defend from physical attacks, the binding of thick rope serves both to protect its wearer and restrain his foes. And the last time we were here, this door was not open. Probably could use that opportunity to get a closer look at the collective Scourge Beasts, or whatever the heck those things are called. So, my bad for that. But once again, we find indisputable evidence that some sort of calamity has taken place here. But the when is a very interesting question, because we see these vines all around here, indicating that these bodies have been petrified and, you know, stuck into this this wall for quite some time. So it's possible that they've all been here. And again, human-shaped mouths, not Temerian-shaped mouths. But it's possible that they've always been here. Or not always, but that they were here from prior to the most recent calamity. Or also that, you know, they existed, that there have been several different calamities. But judging by, yeah, the like, I don't know what to call these. I guess they're not vines because they look more or less just like tree roots growing around them, suggesting that they've been here for a very long time. And these enemies also spit blood at us, much like the blood lickers in the River of Blood. Probably should have repaired my weapon when I went back to replenish my blood vials. Sorry, my recording just froze for a second there because Microsoft had to let me know that I can get Windows 10. Like, I wasn't already aware of that from like the 8 months of pop-ups I've been closing since they first started putting this, what is essentially adware, into their Windows updates, but I digress. So let's go see the Temerian woman, the bell-ringing woman around here. And yeah, these statues seem to depict what are essentially, okay, maybe not these ones specifically. These ones are actually different now that I'm looking at it. Individual with a shrouded face and what looked to be a bunch of children clutching onto their legs. So those statues are actually different, but several of the other statues in the area seem to depict cramped caskets, suggesting that, once again, this is not the first calamity that has taken place here. Okay, so we want to see the bell-ringing woman do her thing. Although she might not do it with us sitting here. So we might need to back up a little bit. So, yeah. I'm not really sure how she's doing that. So, and that one seems to be a buff. Whereas the other one just summons the enemy. But as Redgrave pointed out in his video on the bells, the bells in Bloodborne would seem to indicate another connection between Bloodborne and the Buddhist Bon Festival, where, if you'll recall, you know, there was a connection there with the Winter Lanterns. And Redgrave also did some additional research and found that bells are actually used during the ceremony, or during the festival, for two different reasons. One being to beckon the spirits of the dead, and the other one to send them home. But it seems as though the Temerian bell ringing women only do the one thing. They only seem to beckon the spirits of the dead. Or, in another sense, they're reanimated corpses. And yeah, as a female Temerian... Oh, that's actually an attack, not even a buff. That she actually has a rather, a very human-like mouth shape. So it's odd that the male Temerians all seem to have the circular agape mouth shape, but that the Temerian women do not. Also interesting to note that these ones, and I think more or less every single other bell ringing woman in the game, wear a blue garb, but the ones in the One Reborn boss room actually wear red. So perhaps indicating that a higher status within Temerian society. But we're also going to talk about them a little bit more when we go to Cainhurst. So I don't want to spend too much time here just hanging out with the bell ringing woman. But yeah, that's very, very interesting. They're being summoned from somewhere else. And we see just all over the place, once again, these bodies basically built into the foundation of these buildings, as though they were trying to scale the building to get away from some horrible calamity. If we go down here, I think we'll see a clear indication of that taking place more recently, as opposed to this being a long-standing part of the Yahar'gul architecture. And I didn't think it would be right this second, but yeah, this seems... And again, there's foliage growing around them, so maybe that suggests otherwise, but all of these ones, or most of them anyway, seem to be wearing clothes. Whereas the ones that were obscured by sort of the vines in the wall were all more or less just skeletons with no clothes to speak of. And we see that there are children here too. Children, they're adults, they're men, they're women. They all look to be commoners. and some perhaps slaves or prisoners. So this one actually has shackles attached to its wrists and its neck. And yeah, like just all of the horror that is conveyed by their faces, even though, you know, there's no skin left. Just a wonderful and chilling piece of implicit storytelling here, I think. Although once again, these ones do have clothes, but they're covered in vines. And here we have what seems to be a statue or a petrified cramped casket. And something that I noticed when I was recording, once again in the pre-Blood Moon phase, is that in the area over there that we came from, that we had seen already in episode 8, those statues were there previously, but they're shrouded, much like the ones in the Upper Cathedral Ward. They have sort of a cover place over them. And when I saw that, I assumed that in the post-Blood Moon phase they wouldn't be shrouded, but they are in fact still shrouded in that area. They're not here though. So very clearly either a petrified cramped casket or statues of cramped caskets. So raising questions about how many times this has happened before. Okay, I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything before we go on to the boss, and I think we are, because we've not yet gone in the hot tub time machine, as I like to call it, the teleportation bath, which interestingly enough does allow us to warp from one location to another within the waking world, unlike the lamps. We are bound to the dream as it relates to the lamps. We can't go from one place to another within the waking world. Have to go through the lamps, or we have to go through the hunter's dream, I should say. So yeah, after we deal with this last little bit here, we're going to talk a little bit about Defector Antal, as I promised in a previous episode, because yeah, he's very interesting, and we've not really talked about him yet, because at least in part, because I didn't really have all that much to say until I actually did some research on who or what he seems to be. Very odd. So yeah, so this is the spot where we would have dropped off if we were taking the elevator. There is a bell ringing woman down here. But there is also one of these body parts scourge beasts. Oh no, never mind. The bell ringing woman who's down here is down here when you have a summon. So that's a different one. The one who shows up to ring the sinister bell. So let's see if we can get a closer look at this beast. Yeah. Pretty gruesome. So it has no lower jaw. And yeah, we can see the foot that is currently phasing through my body. And on its left hind leg, it has secondary foot kind of hanging off to the side. And it's like the way the ribs are showing reminds me very much of two things. One being the Loran Silver Beast, and the other being the Moon Presence. Really quite nasty. Alright, I think we're about ready to head towards the boss. The One Reborn, which a number of people have surmised, and I've seen this, and the reason I'm not citing anyone in particular on this, just because I've seen it in so many places, I don't know to what extent, you know, anyone can really claim ownership over that idea. Although people really can't own ideas, but let me just say it's unclear to me who first raised that potential connection. But it does seem as though the One Reborn, at least there is a argument to be made that it is the Orphan of Kos reborn. I don't know whether that's true, but that's something we'll talk about. Worthy to note, perhaps, that that is a very different teleportation, effect than the one we see when warping through the lamps. And I always thought that it actually extended down, but it looks like it's sort of floating in the air. Or no, actually, it has 4 legs. 1, 2. 3, 4, yeah, so it has 4 legs. And then it also has, and Dahlia very kindly answered my request from the previous episode about, you know, the circle of candles in the Chalice Dungeons and what that might mean, or what that could signify. And I don't have the comment right in front of me right now, but I am going to read that out a little bit later on in the episode. But it's interesting to note, for the time being, that here we have another circle of candles. I believe she said something to the effect of it's either to keep things out or to keep things in. But I don't know how that would relate in this case, so we'll leave that for the time being. Okay, I guess that's everything. I was just thinking that that didn't take nearly as long, you know, that was actually really quick, how fast we made our way through the area. And then I looked at my recording and saw that I was at like an hour and 20 minutes, so it felt a lot faster than that. Madman's Knowledge, and that's just a regular Unseen Village resident, I guess. Because I don't know, like, given the chains connected to the hands and the necks of some of these bodies, because I don't know who would willingly live here. So maybe they're all slaves. Because I honestly don't know who would willingly live here, especially if I'm right in suggesting that the bodies caked into the walls, that some of them come from an earlier juncture. Because if you were here and, you know, if Mikolash is like the Yahar'gul mayor, how does he explain the bodies caked into the sides of the buildings? Like, oh, don't worry about it. You know, we're gonna get that cleaned up. Just, you know, raising the taxes a little bit so that we can afford it. But don't worry, that's not gonna, you're not going to end up caked in the wall. Like, I don't know. It's a very odd train of thought, but it is really sad, especially seeing all of these bodies of these children, and they seem to be wearing a very distinctive kind of school uniform. That does look like a real world hat that I've seen, but I have no idea how to refer to it, so I'm not even going to bother in case, you know, it's a hat of a particular cultural or religious significance. I don't want to butcher that. But yeah, all the kids seem to be wearing that hat. This woman and this man are reaching out to each other. And again, we have another of these. It just look, yeah, they must be slaves. Either that or prisoners. And so there does appear to have been a distinct class divide within Yahar'gul. But these ones do appear to be more recent than the others. It's almost like when the calamity happened, they all said, oh crap, now I see what they were trying to do, those bodies there, and they just went and did the exact same thing. So this is, of course, the quote-unquote summon sign of Defector Antal. And I did promise we were going to talk more about him, so let's do that. He was added, as with the other summon, you know, quote-unquote summon signs for NPCs, with the patch 1.07 to prepare the game for the old hunters. And it does seem as though he is very much the same person from whom we get the church pick. One of the old trick weapons in the healing church, a hunting weapon formed from one of the giant picks that appear in old beast tales. The church pick initially serves as a large sword, but when transformed, functions as an extended war pick. In spite of its origins, it is a highly practical weapon. Because their gear is identical, and I don't see why they would put in two different NPC hunters, one as, you know, just an NPC hunter you fight, and another as an old hunter summon, if they weren't the same person. It would make both of them essentially red herrings. Although I'm not sure if I'm using that term correctly. Or at the very least just meaningless NPCs. So we see that he's wearing... No. Meant to use my my monocular there, but I suppose that was just as appropriate. I believe that's the flame sprayer. We'll have to double check that. Yeah, it also has the church pick and the Yahar'gul set. So I believe this is the exact same gear that that NPC is wearing that we find in the underground cells in the Hunter's Nightmare. And you can actually get a look at his face. Antal, come here, please. But yeah, he does have glasses on. Will you hold still for 1 second, please, friend? He's got glasses on. It looks like he's got a goatee. So he looks a little bit like Edgar almost. And I wonder if that's just because they're using, a generic face. So yeah, I'm reasonably certain that what he has is the Flame Sprayer, and in spite of promising that I would pick up the Rosmarinus in the previous episode, I read the description but neglected to buy it. I'm only just realizing that now. So, Flame Sprayer, a special weapon used by certain members of the Healing Church. Spits searing flames by using blood-imbued quicksilver bullets as a special medium. Not the most efficient weapon by any stretch, but sometimes a sea of flame is just what the doctor ordered. Besides, the beasts of Yhar'gul can always use a good cleansing. So yeah, just based on the design, even though I don't have the Rosmarinus to compare it with, it does look very much like the Flame Sprayer. So there's not a lot to go off of if you're just looking at his gear. So what I did was, I just decided, okay, let's look more closely at his name. So, Defector. From Wikipedia, in politics, a defector is a person who gives up allegiance to one state in exchange for allegiance to another, in a way which is considered illegitimate by the first state. More broadly, it involves abandoning a person, cause, or doctrine to which one is bound by some tie, as of allegiance or duty. So this raises several questions. The first being the direction of the defection. So if we're looking at the political definition of it, he would have had to defect from one, either from one branch of the church to another, or from the church in general to something else. He's still wearing his Yahar'gul hunter outfit, so it's possible that he defected from, perhaps the main branch of the church, or, the choir or something like that, and took on the mantle of that of a Yahar'gul hunter, and that's the reason we find him imprisoned in the Hunter's Nightmare. It's also possible that he defected from Yahar'gul to, the main branch of the church, or the choir, or something like that. But given the temporality of it, it's really hard to say. But that would make a certain amount of sense as well, because, perhaps he thought that his the information that he was giving by defecting from one side to another would absolve him of some great crime, but then, discovered that what he did was much too heinous to even be absolved, and therefore he was thrown into the prison. So he could have defected from one camp to another, or from the other camp to the one camp. From the church proper to the School of Mensis, or from the School of Mensis to the church proper. But when we look at the name Antal, we do get a couple of other possibilities. So this is from a site, I believe it's called Name Meanings or something, but the link to which will be in the description either way, because I can't recall the name of the site, but it's a Hungarian variant of Antonius, or Anthony, and it reads, English form of the Roman family name Antonius, which is of unknown Etruscan origin. The most notable member of the Roman family was the general Marcus Antonius, called Mark Antony in English, who for a period in the 1st century BC ruled the Roman Empire jointly with Augustus. When the relationship turned sour, he and his mistress Cleopatra were attacked and forced to commit suicide, as related in Shakespeare's tragedy Antony and Cleopatra from 1606. So that seems a less likely connection, but the next one does actually seem like a somewhat plausible connection. The name became regularly used in the Christian world due to the fame of Saint Anthony the Great, a 4th century Egyptian hermit who founded Christian monasticism. Its popularity was reinforced in the Middle Ages by the 13th century Saint Anthony of Padua, the patron saint of Portugal. It has been commonly but incorrectly associated with Greek anthos, flower, which resulted in the addition of the H to the spelling in the 17th century. So there are a number of things there. One, the association with flower, which, even if it's incorrectly associated, if it's become associated with it, then it's still associated with it, even if it's, an incorrect attribution. So perhaps that was something that Miyazaki was getting after, who once again identifies himself as a naming geek. So we know he puts a lot of thought into these things. The other is the reference to him being a Saint Anthony the Great, a 4th century Egyptian hermit who founded Christian monasticism. So I don't really know anything about monasticism. I know that's something that I believe JSF has talked about a few times, so I'm sure that he'll chime in the comments if he has anything to add. But it's possible that he defected from the school of Mensis to become a monk of some sort. That recall that the broader definition of defector states that more broadly it involves abandoning a person, cause, or doctrine to which one is bound by some tie, as of allegiance or duty. So it's possible that he, maybe he saw what was going on here at Yahar'gul, and maybe it's just as simple as that. He saw what was going on here, and he wanted to put a stop to it. And that as a result of his defection, his abandonment of his, the duty to which he's bound, that he drops his summon sign here to help other players get in the way of the Mensis ritual. That he no longer agrees with the School of Mensis' practices, and he wants to help put a stop to them. So that's pretty much all I got for Defector Antal. I really, there's not a lot of evidence in the game to give us some idea of who and what he is and what his significance is, if anything. And so as we approach the One Reborn boss room, I want everyone to pay close attention to the introduction cinematic, because there are a few things about it that, are very interesting. The most notable of which is that the One Reborn doesn't seem to come from the moon proper, which, as you'll recall from earlier in the episode, we established that it's not actually in orbit. It's hanging really, really low, in between the clouds. That there are clouds going in front of it and behind it. But you'll notice that the moon, that the bell-ringing women, that they sort of blot out the moon and the cosmos, that they open up a portal into the cosmos, and that the One Reborn falls out of that cosmos portal. And so if we think of the Mensis Calamity in terms of a portal, just to briefly review before we go into the boss fight, the portal was opened by the School of Mensis, by Mikolash and his colleagues, who used it as, a portal to beckon to create the Nightmare of Mensis. That they went through the portal into what seems to be a Dreamland's recreation of the alien land of Loran. And that from the other side of that portal, after they left, this calamity started happening with the portal open. A lot of these people perished while trying to get away, and then before the portal closed, the Tumerian bell-ringing women came from the other side. And so there's two different beckonings happening here. The first is the Nightmare of Mensis being beckoned by the School of Mensis, and the second is the bell-ringing women, independent of the School of Mensis, coming here perhaps through the same portal that Mensis opened up, and using all of the body parts here to reanimate dead corpses and to beckon the One Reborn. So that's as best as I understand what is happening here, in the simplest possible terms I can put them. So pay close attention to the intro cinematic as we approach the boss room. yellow backbone, special material used in a holy chalice ritual. Special body parts collected by the healing church. What was this gruesome bait used to lure? The additional rite rotted offering beckons ungodly forces, normally terrifying things, but also worthy prey for a special hunt. So it seems fitting that the One Reborn would drop yellow backbone, seeing as the only other place in the game that we can get that item is in the Chalice dungeons. So it would make sense that the Bellringing women would have used that they're coming from the Chalice dungeons, coming from the old underground labyrinth and or Chalice dungeons, depending on your view of it. That they would come with yellow backbone in hand, or that they would just kind of carry it around in order to beckon the One Reborn. Another point in favor of the One Reborn possibly being the Orphan of Kos are the lyrics to the Hail the Nightmare song, which are in Latin, but in a previous episode we established that we got, I can't remember who left the comment, but they pointed us towards a translation of the song from user Kitchen Sink on GameFAQs. And in English, the lyrics to the song read, and remember, this is what the School of Mensis is chanting in order to beckon the Nightmare of Mensis. And it reads, "Cursed, you pour out your gift. We are tainted, cursed by the beast. Cursed, O Father, I surrender, if you grant it. We are tainted, silver in the shadows of the water. O Mother from the blood, redemption it having been laughed at, rouses itself. It is lamented by the waters. Farewell, farewell, we are tainted in the shadows of the water. And the silver of the water, we are tainted, and the silver of the water. With blood, with blood." So the water imagery that is evoked by those lyrics is a very strong indication, at least to me, that this is in a way a callback. Although at the time the game was released, there was no Orphan of Kos, but the connection does seem very strong. Because recall that after we kill the Orphan of Kos, we send its spirit back to the sea. So the sea again, which is linked with the abyssal cosmos, or the cosmos or the abyss, because they all could very well be the same thing. And the One Reborn very much seems to fall out of an abyssal cosmos, not out of the moon. I don't know what role the moon has to play in it, beyond perhaps just allowing that portal to be opened. But portal opens and out falls the One Reborn. And yeah, that is, I think, all I have to say for now about this place, but I'm sure that, as always, you will all raise some very interesting points in the comment section of things that I've not yet considered. And we're not going to proceed into there for now, because I've already been recording for an hour and 42 minutes, and so we'll save that for either the next episode or the episode after that, when we begin our journey to the Nightmare of Mensis. So I promised in the previous episode that I would get to many more comments this week, and we are going to do just that, so let's not waste any time and let's get started. First, Dezo Penguin writes, I love that you posted this video within one day of this news story appearing. I saw that article and all I could think was Kos. And the excerpt that I've taken from the article, the link to which you'll find in the description, reads, "This is the horrifying sea creature washed up on a beach, which has been baffling oceanic experts. The odd-looking beast, a huge 4 meters long," they need a new editor, was found by sun worshippers on Bonfil Beach in the city of Acapulco in the southwest Mexican state of Guerrero. Shocked tourists took snaps of the underwater monster before sharing them on social media. The floating body was brought to the shore by strong currents that have been affecting that particular part of the Mexican coast. Although the coordinator of the Civil Guard and Fire Brigade, Rosa Camacho, believes that the animal had not been dead for a long time, it still seemed to have rapidly started to decay. And there's a second picture in the article that's a bit better than this one, but it just looks like a giant rock almost. The second picture is a little bit better. I probably should have added that one, but you're all welcome to check it out if you're interested. Desel Penguin goes on to write that the sea monster that duplicates the one in the fishing hamlet also shows up in other Chalice dungeons. And indeed, if I didn't make that explicit, I ought to have, because that sea monster is indeed found, I believe, in virtually every type of dungeon. What I meant to have said was basically that in those types of rooms with, the goopy purple ooze covering the floor basement rooms, those are the rooms in which you find those sea monster skeletons. So yeah, they are everywhere. Your comment at 40 minutes about the sedative find being appropriate. This would be based on the idea that the item-bearing corpses are of tomb prospectors, and that they'd carry sedatives to help calm their minds against the revelations that drive prospectors to madness. The line, "those who delve into the arcane" from the sedative description seems almost too appropriate for I's gravestone. And I'll cover the reason for my change in pronunciation a little bit later on. But yeah, this is something that Redgrave talked about in the episode where we traveled to Bergenworth, that the sedatives would seem to have been doled out to tomb prospectors in particular, because they're delving so deep into the arcane, into the Chalice dungeons or the old underground labyrinth. Desel Penguin goes on to write, "This could be a wild guess, but perhaps the Scourge Beast in Eyes are tomb prospectors who went beastly. Alternatively, since the monster roster is pretty well parallel to the Upper Cathedral Ward, perhaps part of the experiments to create kin monsters involved draining their lesser beastly self off into something else. I don't find this to be a compelling or likely idea, but it kind of raises an eyebrow." That is a really apt observation about the parallel between the Upper Cathedral Ward and the Eyes gravestone, because, we do find Scourge Beasts in the Upper Cathedral Ward, and that's not something I really considered. Concerning Ludwig's Holy Blade, don't forget that the Forgotten Madman from the lower Hintertombs also wields it. We know that he was a former tomb prospector before he went mad. The madman attire that he wears, that beating him allows us to purchase, reveals that. And of course, Gremmy is using it too when you summon him, though you suspect it's the same guy you killed on Layer 2. So either the tomb prospectors were drawn from the ranks of the church hunters, or the Healing Church simply recognized that the weapon was a good one and handed it out among its ranks. And this is something that Whatchamacallit also pointed out, writing that I always interpreted that the use of Ludwig's Holy Blade by some church members just indicated that the sword's use has spread to other factions of the church as time has gone on. After all, the choir spy in the Nightmare of Mensis, that is Edgar, choir intelligencer, also uses one, and I don't think he has multiple factions. Could be wrong, of course. No, I think you and Desel Penguin are both probably right about that perhaps I'm looking too much into the people who are wielding Ludwig's Holy Blade, because it does seem to be a rather common issue throughout the various branches of the church. It's too bad the main game doesn't have the red-blue summon sign breakdown. Maybe it's because it works differently here, with regular summons and League Confederates. I think it's important to point out that Lost and Uncanny DLC weapons can be bought in any Chalice dungeon shop. The one in the lower Hintertombs is readily accessible for Chalice noobs like myself. Yes, it's another thing that if I didn't make explicit, I really ought to have. That, you can buy the Lost and Uncanny versions of those weapons at any Chalice dungeon messenger shop that you find. But we were looking for that one specifically so that we could get our hands on the Sinister Is Root Chalice, or Sinister Eyes Root Chalice. It's another pronunciation change that is going to take some time to get used to, but again, I'll cover that in a minute. It's interesting that, unlike in the Waking World, Ebertos is immediately hostile to you in the Chalice dungeons. Perhaps she remembers that you attacked her in the Waking World, since you had to do that to get to the Eyes Chalice. That is an excellent point, and one that, for me, is really reminiscent of the last giant boss fight in Dark Souls 2, which if you've not played the game, spoiler alert, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The spoiler is that later on we fight the Giant Lord in a memory, in a way that adds new context to that boss fight. That when you walk into the room, he gets really angry, rips off his arms, and then comes right after you. And the reason for that, it seems to me, and it always has seemed to me, is that, yeah, he is remembering you as the person who defeated him in the past. So, very interesting parallel there. And there is another Dark Souls 2 parallel that we're going to talk about a little bit later on as well. Damien is also found in Byrgenwerth, Deso Penguin goes on to point out, outside the Lunarium door. Seems like he's really interested in fighting the kin. And since he's a Mensis scholar and the kin bosses are most strongly associated with the choir, maybe that's the connection, the factional rivalry running both ways. I'll conclude by saying that, yep, this was a rather fun episode. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I know you said in video that you'd be doing Tumerian Ihil, which I'm probably misspelling. No, I think that's correct. But is there any chance of you showing Loran as well? Maybe not lower Loran, but at least some snippets of ailing Loran with lore relevance, such as where you find the Beast Claw and the hunter the official guide names Izzy's Admirer. I'll have to think about that. Certainly there's a possibility of that, but if you haven't noticed, just with the speed with which I'm churning out these episodes, I am trying to ensure that we're able to get this series done before Dark Souls 3 comes out. So I'll add that to my list of things that I'm going to try and do before this series wraps up. Evangeline Reitman writes that the Brainsucker, the Children of Rom, Garden of Eyes, Winter Lantern, Celestial Child, Celestial Minion, by which I think you mean just the Celestial Emissaries, the small Celestial Emissaries, Fluorescent Flower, Vacuous Spider, Amygdala, Celestial Emissary, Ebertos, Daughter of the Cosmos, Brain of Mensis, Living Failures, Orphan of Kos are all classified as kin. So I pulled out my Future Press official guide and double-checked this list to make sure that it was actually accurate. And in spite of what I said in the previous episode, the Brainsucker is not, in fact, classified as kin. Neither are the Garden of Eyes. The Winter Lanterns are not kin either. Amygdala is not kin. Neither is the Brain of Mensis, and neither is the Orphan of Kos. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was clear about that. First Name Last Name writes, hit the 7-minute mark and decided to Google some shit up. Turns out there's an interesting disease called dermatophora root rot, which is caused by a type of mold. Here's the cool thing, it's a primary target for infections in the roots of plants, specifically that of pearl and apple trees, and the Chalice Dungeons have tons of roots. Just thought it was cool to draw that connection. It's the small things that count. This is also something that Jonathan McGregor touches on when he writes, you were talking about the webbing on the ceiling. I don't think it's spider webs. I believe it's tree roots. The further you dive down into the soil, tree roots become more clustered and fine. This would make sense as the Chalice Dungeons are deep underground. So that's a very, very interesting point. And though you could look at the spiderwebs and just connect them to, Patch's compatriots, the spiders. But I do like this idea as well, that they're tree roots. Mark Pons writes, Aegon, the blue effect that you see when the messengers transport you, seems to be an ammonite, which makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Random Guy also adds that it also looks like a metamorphosis rune. Sharp Apples on the same subject writes that the shape around the messengers when they teleport the player looks like a logarithmic spiral, which is a design that oddly has a lot of connections to things in Bloodborne. The shape of our galaxy, cosmos, the shell design of many mollusks, the shell women in the Hunter's Nightmare, and the nerves in the cornea, eyes on the inside, eyes of a blunt-struck hunter, etc. And spirals, if you recall from episode 19, is also something that JSF and I talked a fair bit about in the context of the fishing hamlet. So I went ahead and did a little side-by-side. And here I believe I just used the clockwise metamorphosis, but it looks more like the anti-clockwise metamorphosis. And it does look a lot like, once again, the shells, the spiral shells that we find throughout the fishing hamlet. Dahlia Darkside writes, magic circles are used to keep something inside of it from getting out, and something outside from getting in, both as a protection and a confine, so it appears to be the circle cast around the arguably valuable tomb mold to keep people's hands off of them, So as you're attempting to enter the circle, it casts you away as it would any perceived intruder. Dahlia goes on to write that with that said, magic circles are a basic practice in rituals of any kind, so it may very well simply be meant as a means of quick transportation, but personally I feel it's more so somebody was doing something with that mold, had cast a circle around against intruders, then either by teleportation or whenever they were done, left the circle erected, and seeing as you weren't the one who cast the circle, you get spirited away as a result. Either way, you end up at the rather unfortunate position it takes you to, hence my leaning towards my previous explanation. As though we know very little about the choir, to find them using such rituals and the chalice associated with them, it doesn't surprise me that something like that would appear. Perhaps a reference to the prevalence of secret societies in the Victorian age that did practice rites of high magic, that use magic circles, but that's just a little speculation from my perspective. Well, thank you for that, for answering my call, requesting that you speak to that candle circle in the previous episode. Much appreciated. On the Aberdeen quote-unquote sea monster, Haley Johnson writes that on further research, it seems that the Aberdeen sea monster is a pilot whale, which I think fits in quite nicely with the whole theme of the fishing village. JSF writes, the robed statue in the triptych looks to me like it's meant to be a cleric, making the statues represent humans, clerics, and beasts. This is what society in Yharnam looks like just before it falls, and is how Loran looked before its fall. There are beast clerics in Loran. So it probably recurs whenever the blood is introduced into a society. The Cosmos effect might be arcane haze. The centipede enemies drop it, and they're connected to the cosmos if their death animation is anything to go by. This is also something that 12 is a letter pointed out, when he writes, the particle effects surrounding Ebertos, Tomb Mold, the Holy Moonlight Blade, and other cosmic associated things in the game appears to quite literally be arcane haze, the ritual item you scrolled over when talking about Tomb Mold. Unfortunately, the item doesn't have much implications in its description. JSF goes on to write, the spider attack you missed is them summoning an energy ball that does an area of effect attack. The ones in Mensis don't do it for some reason. The brainsucker's elongated limbs and extremely pale skin makes them look like research hall patients. We also never see them in the Hunter's Nightmare, which makes it seem like they're a recent development. When we complete Adeline's questline, her epiphany is that the Healing Church needs to host phantasms. Now look at the brainsucker. It's pretty clear that they're not a squid-headed humanoid monster like the Mind Flayers from Demon Souls. It's a composite creature made up of a human body with a phantasm living inside of its presumably empty skull, with the front tentacles protruding through cavities in the skull. The thing that comes out of the back is either the phantasm's body, or else a tube that allows them to siphon insight. Sea snails siphon oxygen in a similar way, and provide a picture we'll look at in just a second. So it looks like the Healing Church figured out how to host phantasms, possibly cause parasites, and that the phantasms eventually take over their hosts, resulting in brainsuckers. And yeah, you can see the tube there that JSF is talking about. And yeah, kind of creepy. But it seems an obvious parallel. Finally, the scar on the statue. I think it's Crown of Thorns imagery. I was sure I'd seen it before in a Souls game, and only just realized it shows up in Demon Souls. There's a boss called the Fool's Idol that you fight in the cathedral with Christian imagery everywhere, and she's got a decoration on her forehead that looks like blood dripping from a wound. She's also a creepy sentient doll. Image here. And yeah, it seems pretty clear cut. And but I also wanted to add to this something that I'm surprised JSF missed, and that is in Dark Souls 2. There is another boss with a crown of thorns, and that is the Looking Glass Knight. And this is something I talked about a fair bit in my Dark Souls 2 Let's Talk lore playthrough, which, as I've mentioned in the past, the quality is a little bit less than that which you may have become accustomed to with this series. But if you're interested in checking that out, then you are welcome to do so. Koipop writes, Ebertos is like Queen Yharnam. The creature we encounter in the waking world is a projection, weeping as the Pthumerian Queen does in Moonside Lake and Nightmare of Mensis. And as Yharnam is grieving for her dead child, it may clue us into why Ebertos is stooped over the calcified altar of despair from the Yharnam stone. The queen lies dead, but her horrific consciousness is only asleep, and it stirs in unsettling motions. We find both Yharnam and Ebertos at the bottom of the chalices, and like the queen, I posit that Ebertos is long dead, or as dead as a great one can be, asleep perhaps. The Eyes Chalice is called, after all, the Eyes Gravestone. And that brings me to the comment that has affected my pronunciation of the name of that chalice dungeon, and it's from Krishna Bola, who writes, "What if is, as I've been pronouncing before, is actually pronounced eyes?" And that seems to me to be a brilliant, just like the switch that I recently made from Thumerian to Tumerian. I never understood what or how you were supposed to pronounce ISZ, but it seems to me that, yeah, eyes. It makes perfect sense. So I apologize for having, with this revelation, mispronounced the name of that chalice dungeon for the entirety of this playthrough, and especially in the last episode in which we covered it. But I'm going to try and remember from now on to pronounce it as the Eyes Gravestone as opposed to the Is Gravestone. It certainly rolls off the tongue much easier, if nothing else. Charlie writes, like some other comments, the messengers kind of look like tiny Tumerians, and the doll does call them something like the fleeting will of the ancients. Moreover, the Tumerians were an ancient people who went through the scourge of the beasts. That might also explain why they worship hunters, since hunters hunt beasts. Food for thought. This is something that Vishnu added to when writing, "I first noticed that the fur-covered Tumerians with horns has the right horn cut in half, like Brador's head garb. Second, since there is a Tumerian beast statue, could the beasts roaming in the chalice dungeons be Tumerians instead of humans? Third, the little ones, they too have the same face/mouth shape, like the Tumerians. Could there be a connection?" So I've been thinking about this a lot, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, and I don't know if it's something that I'm ready to commit to, that this idea just yet, that the messengers could be Tumerians, but unless anyone else has any other ideas, I have heard no more compelling an explanation than this. I don't know why the Tumerians, like perhaps they've been cursed, much like the Healing Church Hunters in the aftermath of the fishing hamlet, that perhaps the Tumerians have been cursed for some reason, and forced to carry the burden of the messengers. But yeah, very interesting idea. I think I need to think about it some more before I speak any further to it, but thank you very much to everyone who raised that possible connection in the comments of the previous episode. Smarty Marty writes, about the large bell you rang and wondered about. So my dad plays the bells in bell towers, and so I've had some experience with bells and have personally been to 2 bell foundries. That bell was about a medium-sized bell, which still makes it a big deal. Those are very expensive to produce and would weigh hundreds of pounds. I can't think of any concrete reason it should be in that room other than a cool visual and auditory effect. Yet it leads me to a lot of speculation. We already know that bells have a lot of power in the Bloodborne universe. They can be used to transport people across worlds and even to summon undead familiars. Considering the size of that power, presumably it could have had incredible power compared to the handbells used by the players and the enemies. Perhaps enough to summon the Great Ones. It must be important considering the expense that would have been needed to create it, yet I did see that it was cracked. That could explain why your ringing it did nothing. Either way, I've got little real explanation, but due to my background in bells, it did interest me. And we know the care FromSoft puts into every little detail, so maybe they had intentions behind this bell. So thank you very much for bringing your personal experience to bear on that, because yeah, I've not personally been to a bell foundry myself, nor do I know anyone who has anything to do with bells, so I very much appreciate the insight that's provided here. Flubbed Pig writes, the description of eyes in the root chalice makes it sound as if the Great Ones lived in eyes, rather than it being a Tumerian location. Is it possible that Eyes is an abandoned Great One civilization, and that's why Ebertos is referred to as Left Behind? Maybe. I do like the idea of Ebertos and Yharnam as being sort of parallel characters, and I do like the idea also of Ebertos being an ascended Tumerian. So there's a lot of pieces and a lot of moving parts here, and regardless of what we decide in terms of what we think is the most compelling story, I do think that there are a lot of really interesting possibilities here. But that's going to do it for this episode, so thank you all very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!